The Ukrainian army made the most important maneuver on Ukrainian soil. A convoy carrying 15,000 rounds of ammunition bound for Russia was destroyed. As a result, the Russian army was at a loss for what to do, and incidents occurred in numerous military headquarters where dissemination was supposed to take place. The number of soldiers responding to Putin increased, which caused a major concern in the Kremlin during the final stages of the Russian-Ukrainian war. The Ukrainian army began to change its tactics in order to put the Russian troops in a tough situation. The most important of these several efforts was the detection of supply lines and the destruction of potential supply convoys in this region. The fact that the Russian army possessed an almost limitless supply of soldiers demonstrated that the Ukrainian army could not advance in fierce battles. As a result, the Ukrainian army prepared to attack the Russians in a radically different way. On the basis of the justification for the conflict, the Ukrainian army garnered a lot of support. The development, both quantitative and qualitative, was made possible by this support. The desert victory of Ukrainian forces over the Russian army was made possible by the support they received. It was made possible by the army receiving the tanks it required and the vast amount of missiles that were delivered. However, assistance was given in other areas as well, including the training of Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainian army's intelligence training was unquestionably the most significant of these. The Ukrainian army has advanced to the point that it can now anticipate every move made by the Russians even before they make a small one. As a result of this training, and as soon as this happened, raids on the Russian army's convoys began. When compared to Putin, the Ukrainian army showed that it had a significant advantage despite some backup opposition from Ansel and the Russian army. It soon became evident that they lacked the supplies and ammunition necessary to even move a finger. The Ukrainian army consequently made the quick decision to take use of its growing intelligence capability. It dispatched their best skilled specialists in this area to map every back road within cell other. The Ukrainian army's special forces units started moving in this direction. The Ukrainian army located a very crucial spot, and preparations have begun for this action that will serve as the foundation for much larger actions against the Russian army. The Ukrainian army knew how important a supply line the road near the back is. As a result, it began to send troops in that direction, just as the Ukrainian army was being given credit for the operation. And other details discovered by intelligence convoy of 15,000 rounds of ammo was heading into the Russian army. After that, the Ukrainian army began to lay explosives at the key intersections of the supply line. The Ukrainian army would start to squeeze the Russians in back mode in a very different way as a result of this breakthrough. And it was discovered that the convoy was moving thanks to the intelligence obtained from the Russian army's spies. This was the initial point at which the procedure began. The Russians had previously exploited this territory. Thus, the Ukrainian army would advance with confidence. The Ukrainians had a very real potential of being surprised. Knowing this, the Russian convoys started to approach cautiously in the direction of Bakhmut's crucial location. The Ukrainian army took up positions and set up an extremely well-planned ambush spot. At the same moment, the Ukrainian troops waited for the Russian truck to approach the mines after hearing its sounds when a mine under the armored car in front of the Russian convoy exploded. The Russian army was taken by surprise. Convoy was forced to halt. Soldiers from Ukraine immediately began firing across the Russian convoy. When they realized this, several Russian forces attempted to retreat but were unable to coordinate their actions. As a result, Ukraine was able to unleash rocket-propelled grenade launchers at the back of the Morse vehicle. The Russian soldiers understood they were trapped. As a result of this development, the majority of Russian soldiers had already thrown down their weapons. However, some soldiers persisted in fighting. Vehicles suffered severe damage throughout the combat, making it obvious that the Ukrainian army had prevailed. The Ukrainian army captured all the men in the convoy, as well as the remaining ammunition, and moved to return to the Ukrainian boundaries as some Russian soldiers attempted to contact the headquarters and request assistance. However, before they could do so, the radio was silenced by jammers. The Ukrainian Army's most recent mission was crucial. As soon as he learned about this operation, Putin became enraged. Putin has recently faced many challenges. Economic penalties are the primary cause of these challenging times because the Russian army is unable to mobilize due to these sanctions. The Union Army is gaining strength in every area. Such victories have rendered the Russian army incapable of initiating even the smallest action against Ukraine. The Russian army will eventually raise the white flag and depart if this keeps up, according to all observers, as Russia is on the point of going bankrupt now. Putin isn't sure of what to do. He began to see that there is no other course of action in these recent days when he was unable to find a solution to any issue. As the situation develops, the problems in the Russian army caused by the economic crisis will only become worse, leaving Russia with its largest dilemma ever. The current actions by the Ukrainian army have made Russia's economic condition considerably worse. The fundamental cause of this was that numerous nations, which are regarded as the world's economic pillars, successively implemented embargoes against Putin in an effort to stop Russia's unlawful invasion. These embargoes are anticipated to give the Ukrainian army soon-to-come significant advantages over the Russians. As long as the economic crisis persists, Russia will no longer be able to produce even ammunition to defend against Ukraine. A serious problem lies at the Russian army's door, although it is yet unclear how Russia would respond to the crisis in Ukraine. Additional analysts are capable of startling everyone. War analysts claim that this priority, which the Ukrainian army quickly set, is still working quite well. This circumstance and its proponents is in fact laying the foundation for Russia to experience severe political upheaval. Things are becoming extremely problematic as a result of numerous groups inside the Russian army mobilizing against the lack of ammunition and supplies. Even though the Russian army is likely to see its worst days as the battle progresses, it is unacceptable that even the ammunition that is used on a daily basis cannot be replaced if things continue the way they are. Many new recruits will become discouraged even before they begin. The Ukrainian army is anticipated to make more advancements in a relatively short period of time. And as this advancement continues, the Ukrainian army is anticipated to eventually be in a position to entirely drive the Russians out of their nation. In contrast, the world has started to mock Putin's approach to actively resolving numerous unresolved issues in light of the current state of affairs. The Ukrainian army is now anticipated to experience even worse days in the near future, according to data released in recent days. Russia's jobless rate, which has surpassed that of previous year, has begun to rise like an avalanche. 5.4 million Russians applied for passports in 2022 alone. All Russian youth began to organize to leave the country after the new mobilization declaration. If this keeps up, Putin won't soon be able to act against Ukraine in any way or even have soldiers in his army. So what is the current actual solution? The fundamental way to solve this issue is for Putin to once again accept full responsibility and extend an apology to the public. Another possibility is that we are in for a major resignation because to the devastation this conflict has caused, and in this circumstance, the political volatility of Russia leaves everyone wondering how things will pan out. Larger scandal. There are no Russian general staff personnel to be found. The staff is one of the most significant factors in the conflict. The direction of the war can be determined by a staff with knowledge and initiative, but occasionally the desires and anxieties of the decision-maker can affect this personnel. Even an army that is winning the fight will suffer a significant loss. In such circumstances, currently the Russian military staff is being purged. We are currently experiencing the brutal Ukrainian country offensive. The Russian army is exhausted after more than a year of fighting. This attrition rate has risen much worse. When the Ukrainian nation offensive began with the recent coup bottom, it was evident that the Russian army's chain of command had issues. However, issues have recently started to surface at the military command. We shall look at a number of claims made against the Russian general staff in this paper. If these claims are accurate, it drastically limits the Russian military's ability to conduct war. What is going on with the Russian army then? Let's examine the most recent advancements. According to reports, distrust toward Putin's inner circle, which already has a security system, has increased to its greatest level since the Wagner Group's coup attempt. One of the figures in Putin's inner circle, who is allegedly subject to the aforementioned mistrust during the coup attempts staged by the Wagner Group, is Sergei Surovikin, the commander of the Russian occupation forces in Ukraine. Sergei Surovikin recently published a video urging the gang to put an end to the coup. Surovikin's film was filled with fascinating insights with a rifle in his hands. Surovikin emerged in front of the camera and appeared to be menacing the Wagner Group. The charges, however, claim that Surovikin's actions were merely a show. Sergei Surovikin, also known by his alias General Armageddon, reportedly knew about the pro-Collagen and Wagner Group's coup attempt from the very beginning. The general was aware of this plot, but he chose to remain silent and support Prigozhin's strategy. Like the vast majority of Russians, the general supported Putin's ouster as the country's leader, as they allegedly sent a threatening video to the Wagner Group in an effort to make it appear as though Wagner was unaware of the coup item and would support Putin in the event of a failure. The claims made about it by the Russian press detonated on the agenda. The opera included the Kremlin. These accusations were appalling. Additionally, these charges state that Putin's closest allies were the ones who betrayed him. The Ukrainian Bar's commander was Sergei Sorokin. That is to say, if these accusations are accurate, Sorokin likewise desired for Russia to lose the conflict in Ukraine. The most recent information from local sources indicates that after the accusations, Sorokin was taken into custody, instead then being detained. According to many accounts, it was an arrest. What actually happened to Sorokin then? Numerous media agencies have recently stated that no one is sure of the Surovikin's whereabouts and that he has been unreachable ever since word of the explosion spread. These reports have caused a lot of world continuity to be suspended. This is because news of the suicides of the majority of the higher-ranking Russian officials who have vanished in the past have been made public. These accusations against Sorokin also began to take their place on the agenda following this disappearance. Following the publication of these charges, Russian sources have accused the international community of spreading false information about Russia and interfering in Russian internal affairs. The startling aspect of this, though, was how adamantly unwilling Russian sources were to publicly comment on Sorokin's condition. The most recent information indicates that Surovikin is in police custody. However, neither his whereabouts nor the accusations against him are known to us. The head of his staff, Valery Gerasimov, is the subject of another major complaint regarding the command of the Russian armed forces. Gromov, the Russian chief of general staff, has not been seen in public for a very long period, according to Russian media and outside sources. Additionally, Gerasimov is not mentioned in Russia's regular reporting on the ongoing bar. The majority of Russia's top commanders are reportedly under extreme pressure as a result of the recent coup attempt. According to Western sources, allegedly, the governmental power in Russia is looking into the comment's role in the coup using every method at their disposal. It is anticipated that this mistrust of the comment would result in serious issues. Additionally, it is anticipated that a significant number of staff military members will be let go in order to support the Wagner Group leader. Precaution inside the army. We believe it is entirely plausible to discuss the likelihood of the Russian army encountering a significant power vacuum on the front lines in such a scenario. Prigozhin, who is thought to be behind these events in Russia, was also reported to have made his home in Belarus recently. The chief of Ukraine's military intelligence, Budanov, made a startling remark regarding Prigozhin in front of the general public. Budanov asserts that Prigozhin's execution was ordered by the Russian government to the Federal Security Service, the intelligence agency in charge of overseeing the security of Russian citizens living abroad. The accusations made by Budanov are extremely astounding. With these accusations against Prigozhin, we shall find out whether or not this claim is true in the days to come. The Russian media oligarchs' attempts to undermine the dominance of the Prigozhins in the media are another remarkable aspect. The Kremlin-backed business people have allegedly started working to undermine the influence of the promotions in the media. According to rumors, the business people who are actively trying to buy Prigozhin-affiliated media sites want to sell the Wagner Group. The following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The number of fatalities from falling from tall buildings is rising daily, which is completely incongruous with these media outlets. The most recent information from regional sources is that another senior Russian figure has perished after falling from a tall building. The vice president of a nearby bank was this individual, Kristina Vyakova. It is pretty amazing that a week after Kristina Bykova fell from the skyscraper, her death was made public. The teenage vice president allegedly fell from her apartment's window on the 11th level of a Moscow building. At night, Vyakova passed away instantly a week after the incident. News of Bokasa's passing was made public. Moscow police are still looking into the event, according to reports from Russian authorities. However, professionals who described why such dull cases have grown, particularly in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and assassination-related incidents. This incident's classification as an assassination in Vyakova is due to this. According to reports, Bokova is a Russian citizen who opposes the war. We are aware that numerous senior anti-war Russian people have perished in such accidents since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Consequently, many experts do not consider this death to be typical. How do you feel? Do you believe the Russian generals were involved in the attempted coup? Why may Servine have suffered? Is it conceivable that Prigozhin was murdered? Can Russian businesses thwart Prigozhin's media dominance? Your thoughts on the mysterious death in Russia. Do you believe that this death was caused by an assassination? Could Bykova have been murdered? We value your viewpoint. Fighting needs courage. People must first rule out the prospect that they will succeed before they can emerge victorious from any conflict. A soldier who lacks self-confidence lacks any will to fight. This is a natural law. Defeat and disintegration of 8-head troops. If an army does not have a reason to fight, what principles are the soldiers in the Russian-Ukrainian battle willing to sacrifice their lives for? Everyone admires the Ukrainian army for its valiant efforts in defending its country, driving out the invaders, and achieving independence. Why even Russian soldiers and citizens oppose their country's invasion attempt? Every single soldier in the Ukrainian army who is committed to winning is battling, risking their lives while the Russian invaders are not doing the same. It is difficult for the Russians to find soldiers to battle. The majority of Russian soldiers believe they will lose this war. Because of this, many Russians attempt to end the conflict rather than engage in combat. Let's examine the tale of the Russian soldiers who chose not to fight. The Union Army's major onslaught against Russia has been planned since the start of spring. The Ukrainian Army, which has spent a lot of time getting ready for this mission, is anticipated to start a four-pronged offensive against the invading Russians. The Russians are gearing up for defense because they are extremely terrified of this offensive. They are constructing a defense line against the Abyssinian army, which they fear would advance into the Russian heartland. And it is known that trenches are being constructed in the countryside of the city near the Abyssinian border in the east of Russia. Russian soldiers fighting on the front lines are attempting to flee the conflict. According to rumors, some of the Russian occupying troops in Zaporizhia Oblast are attempting to flee the conflict in novel ways. The former Ukrainian mayor of the city of Melitopol in the southern portion of Zaporizhia Oblast, Ivan Fedorov described the Russian forces' escape strategy in his words. Melitopol is situated right in the middle of the region south of the Geneva River. Are preparing to withdraw because of concern for the Ukrainian army's anticipated attack. The Russian commanders wanted to retract this statement on the lives of their soldiers, but the Kremlin forbade it. Despite the fact that there are voices in Russia pushing for a ceasefire and a disengagement from the conflict, the Kremlin is still undecided. While the soldiers are looking for methods to leave the battlefield, this is greatly agitating the commanders and Putin thanks to the City I Want to Live project. Dozens of Russian soldiers who have been attempting to surrender to the Ukrainian army for months are now fighting on the Ukrainian side of the conflict via the I Want to Live mobile application. There are other ways Russian soldiers would rather leave the conflict than I Want to Live. Numerous allegations have surfaced of Russian soldiers leaving their units either before they reach the front or after spotting an opening there. When the news that the Ukrainian army was going on, the offensive was on the agenda, Russian soldiers who do not want to sacrifice their life for Putin's aspirations increase their attempts to flee, believing that they still have a chance. The soldiers' favorite escape routes are somewhat unexpected. This issue is clarified by the federal comments regarding the movement in the Zaporizhia Oblast. Federal declared that the evacuation of residents from the local communities had started and that a probe into the conflicts that occurred close to several nuclear installations has been launched by the International Atomic Energy Agency. Federal added that other people are being evacuated in addition to civilians. According to Fedorov, troops who wanted to flee the army dressed in civilian clothes and mixed with the throng while residents were being evacuated from 18 separate communities. They saw some Russian servicemen attempting to flee while wearing civilian clothing. Commanders in Russia were informed, but it was already too late. Many Russian soldiers were able to flee the army while posing as civilians. The authorities were taken aback by this approach, though, as the Ukrainian Army and Rafael Grassi's team approached the newly appointed Russian governor of Zaporizhia Oblast, Yevgeny Beletsky declared the beginning of the evacuation of residents from 18 separate settlements visited and inspected Zaporizhia nuclear power reactors. The delegation warned of the threat with Charlie Matvienko, the head of Ukraine's I Want to Live hotline and current personnel, and determined that the fighting in the area of the plants was becoming more unpredictable and potentially dangerous. 3,200 Russian soldiers reportedly gave themselves up in the past month, according to sources. Russian troops. According to Matvienko's remarks, the Abyssinian army's counteroffensive has enhanced their desire to give up. The number of surrenders increased 10% over the previous month. By bringing up this subject, the Twitter handle for the Ukrainian Defense Ministry made fun of Russia. According to the Defense Ministry, the season of surrender gets harder the closer the counteroffensive gets. Don't wait till it gets hot. The ideal circumstances exist right now. Andrei Rousseau, a spokesman for Ukrainian intelligence, claims that service among 4 Russian prisoners of war demonstrates that 50% of Russian soldiers solely fight for financial gain. According to soldiers, they are only fighting for a better standard of living. According to the responses to the service, the opinion authorities looked into the degree to which these expectations of Russian servicemen were met. 45.7% of Russian soldiers failed to achieve these objectives. They were unable to make a living and did not get the funds they anticipated. You stated as much in a press release. That is not love for the homeland, not even trust in propaganda or love for President Vladimir Putin, but the desire for life stability. Officials are finally speaking out about the Russian army's military issues. In an interview with a local radio station, Rogozin, a former deputy prime minister of Russia and the head of the Russian space agency, discussed the country's lack of military personnel. He claimed that the call for mobilization was insufficient and that another one should be issued in an effort to close the military gap. Remember, Rogozin warned that the enemy is more powerful than we are. In the autumn there ought to have been 2 instead of simply 1. Rogozin mentioned Putin in his statement. Order for partial mobilization issued in September 2022 when Russia sustained significant battlefield casualties in Ukraine. Because men are getting hurt, our fighters are dying, and we are losing combat. Ready men. We have personnel issues. Rogozin stated that they must be refreshed. Rogozin's comments demonstrate that even before the offensive has begun, the Russians are unable to make up for their losses. Even more losses are being incurred by the Russian army before it can restock its soldiers and ammunition. On the other side, the modernizing army is painstakingly preparing its objectives for the major offensive operation, particularly in Crimea. The Ukrainian army is anticipated to start an operation to reclaim Crimea, according to Mikhail Podolyak. Zelensky had before vowed to recapture Crimea after Ukrainian politicians within 5 months. We aim to rid Crimea of its occupiers. Russian military positions are being sought out by Ukrainian intelligence. Crimean military locations have been plotted. Russian ammo stores, field depots, military outposts, and troop positions are marked on the map. One by one, all citizens of the temporarily controlled Crimea are advised by a representative of Ukrainian intelligence to stay away from military installations, the facilities that will soon aid the army of the attacker. He emphasized the scope of the operation with his verse. The Union Army will launch a very thorough operation in response to your statements asking the civilian population to avoid these points. According to a map made under the direction of independent radio host Igor Tokar that shows all Russian military installations in Crimea. By moving away from these points, the map's objective is to shield Crimean residents from potential attacks. Igor Tokar, we wish to inform the Crimeans of the peril present in these locations. After all, he remarked, many people reside close to Russian Federation military installations. These events all pointed to the Ukrainian army soon beginning operations in Crimea. The Ukrainian army is moving forward piece by piece as Russian soldiers try to flee the front line. The Union Army is currently very close to winning the war. What impact do you believe the Russian soldiers' escape plans will have on the outcome of the conflict? Will Russia be able to recruit troops for the battle with soldiers deserting the army? How will Putin carry on the war? Will Russian leaders and generals be able to repel Ukraine? They are so terrified of a Ukrainian offensive at that point. When will the operation by the Ukrainian army in Crimea start? What do you predict will be the turnaround time for the Ukrainian army to recover Crimea? Please respond as soon as possible. And armies have struggled with a variety of issues throughout history. One of them is army mutinies that occur as the opponent is being attacked. One of the challenges the Russian army had in its attempt to invade Ukraine was the onslaught by friendly soldiers from within that put the army between two fires. Are the rebel soldiers part of the army? The Ukrainian army continues to astound the Russian army with its meticulously prepared actions. Russians, both inside and outside the Russian army, are furious about their country's losses on the front lines. Let's examine the ongoing Ukrainian operations and changes to the Russian military. The Pioneer's reporting is based on assertions made by trustworthy sources in the conflict area and field research reports from government agencies. The Super Things button allows you to assist us without interfering with the work of a vast crew. It has been 1 year since Russia invaded Ukraine. On top of that, a year later, the Russian military has not succeeded in any of its goals. The majority of the personnel and ammunition required to accomplish its objectives had to be buried on Ukrainian territory. Big losses have resulted in big issues. The generals blame Russian President Putin for the failings, and the soldiers blame the generals for the shortcomings. This downward spiral of accountability is becoming worse every day. It's hardly news that the Russian army has 1 billion soldiers. Cases of mutiny or attempted mutiny have been documented in a number of units since the 3rd month of the war. Mid-level Russian officers may have sabotaged their own troops to thwart the invasion operations, according to unconfirmed reports relayed by a Pentagon official. Russian soldiers are justified in making these efforts, since the Tsar of Russia claimed responsibility for meeting all of his troops' needs when he sent them to the front. Putin lacks the resources to carry out his plans, hence he is unable to fulfill this task. He is unable to provide his men any ammo or provide them with food and shelter. As a result, Russian troops are rendered useless against the Ukrainian army in an effort to save their lives. Soldiers who anticipate finding themselves in a similar circumstance are rebelling against their commanders. The Russian units' discontent and uprising were validated by the recordings obtained by the Ukrainian Army's cybersecurity units. Russian soldiers are allegedly being bullied and under pressure by their leaders, according to Ukrainian cybersecurity groups that examine the calls, messages, and encrypted material of Russian soldiers. Russian soldiers are duped by the notion of Great Russia in addition to the actual issues. When recruited, Russian soldiers reach the front, they discover something very different. It is impossible to hide the Russians' shoulder attitude against the army. In reality, Russian soldiers are even more eager to declare their opposition to the chain of command to the world. An incident that occurred on November 6 can be considered in this perspective as a turning point. In a letter from the 155th Marine Brigade of the Russian Armed Forces to the local governor, the collapse of the Russian army was described in the first person, and 300 men and tanks were lost as a result, according to Russian leaders, and half of the Russian army's mechanized vehicles. Russian soldiers are regarded by their superiors as incompetent losers looking for fame in the operation planned by the Ukrainian army because of their errors and deeds. Leaders no longer enjoy the respect of their soldiers. This letter is significant in a number of ways. In the first place, the 155th Marine Brigade serves as a role model for troops in other units who are considering mutinying. The bravery of the 155th Marine Brigade could detonate a bomb that was about to go off. The Marines' bravery serves as a form of intimidation against Putin. It is also significant that the soldiers refer to Putin as the Great One. Their correspondence, these words are the soldiers' criticism of Putin's ego. They also demand legal action against the Great One, blaming him for their misfortunes and deaths, which, the pressure from leaders is one of the main issues Russian soldiers confront. A chain of command governs the phenomenon of war. As a result, a general is also accountable for a soldier's errors. Being aware of this, Russian generals and commanders place obligations on their soldiers that they are not required to carry out in order to escape their own obligations. If they fail, they attempt to save themselves by retaliating against the soldiers they believe to be at fault. Russian leaders have reduced the military to a toy, despite the fact that it is revered in many nations and religions. The quantity of military troops and vehicles destroyed in just 4 days is another startling statistic. The amount is too exorbitant for a professional army. The soldiers are unable to tolerate these casualties as a result. They blame Putin and Russian commanders for this scandal. One of the information that has surfaced is the letter from the 155th Marine Brigade. On the other hand, it's also likely that there are a lot more letters out there that haven't been discovered or released in the media. Right now, the Russian army is all fire and guns. Every setback on the front lines has the potential to ignite gunpowder and fire. We may predict that this may occur soon based on the Ukrainian army's current activities. Let's examine the most recent Ukrainian actions. The Ukrainian army campaign in Volodymyr was successful in driving back the Russian forces with a fire advantage. The Ukrainian army pounded the Russian troops mercilessly. The 2 TB tanks and 1 BMP-1 infantry fighting vehicles of the Russian army were destroyed by artillery fire from the 72nd Mechanized Brigade. The Ukrainian army also destroyed 3 Russian BMPs and a Russian Army Criminal 1890 tank during the actions in the domestic area. The Russian army is suffering daily greater losses. Both the army and the Putin administration are impacted by these defeats. We mentioned that Putin was thought to be at fault for the losses in the 155th Marine Brigade of the Russian Army's letter at the Russian Federal Assembly. Putin just gave a speech. He said in his speech that the Russian army had triumphed and that the Russian state provided the men with everything they required. It is impossible to say that these assertions have received a response. Putin's oppressive and confrontational actions have long angered the Russian populace. Even the most ardent supporters of the war and Putin, the Russian nationalists, are now beginning to unite with the populace. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is being criticized more and more for being a personal endeavor. The army is tense. People are angry, and even Putin's loyalists are turning against him that Ukraine's side would win the war soon. Putin's ability to bring people together is a source of fascination because neither his dependable army, his people, or his most fervent followers are on his side anymore. Negative surveys and outrage against him will do.